I drove 7 hours through a blinding sandstorm just to surprise my family for Thanksgiving, only to be left standing in the freezing cold. My sister cracked the heavy oak door open, looked me up and down with absolute disgust, and smirked. "Do you not get the hint?" she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "This year is for family only." And before I could even process the cruelty of her words, the door slammed shut in my face. The deadbolt clicked. I stood alone on the porch of the massive Atlanta mansion. My name is Chloe. I am 32 years old, and up until that exact moment, I was the invisible bank account keeping that very mansion from being foreclosed. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their fake billionaire lifestyle before the turkey was even cold, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who mistook your generosity for weakness. I turned around and walked slowly back to my car. The wind was howling, whipping sand and dead leaves against my face, biting through the thin fabric of my simple wool coat. I climbed into the driver's seat of my unassuming sedan, shivering, staring through the windshield at the brightly lit windows of the house. Inside, I could see the silhouettes of my parents, Thomas and Brenda. I could see my sister Jasmine and her flashy husband DeAndre. They were laughing, pouring expensive wine into crystal glasses, celebrating. They looked like the perfect, wealthy, successful family they always pretended to be for the church congregation and their country club friends. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. For years I had played the role of the quiet, unremarkable daughter. I worked in commercial real estate and managed private equity. I built a massive portfolio from nothing. But because I wore plain clothes, drove a normal car, and refused to flash designer labels, my family assumed I was just a low-level office worker struggling to get by. They had no idea that I was the sole owner of the LLC that held the deed to the very house they were standing in. They had no idea that when they faced bankruptcy 5 years ago, I quietly bought the property and set up a blind trust to cover the mortgage, so my parents could keep their precious social status. Suddenly my phone buzzed in the cup holder. The sudden noise made me jump. I pulled the phone out expecting a weather alert about the storm. Instead, the screen lit up with a text message from my father. I opened it, my eyes scanning the words. It was an accidental text clearly meant for my mother. The message read, "I cannot believe she actually showed up. Does she really think she is welcome here dressed like a homeless person? DeAndre said if she comes inside, he is taking his VIP investors and leaving immediately. We cannot risk her ruining the aesthetic tonight. Tell Jasmine to make sure the doors are locked." I read the message again, and then a third time. The words burned into my brain. Ruining the aesthetic. VIP investors. I stared at the glowing screen, waiting for the familiar sting of tears, waiting for the heartbreak that usually accompanied my family's rejection. But the tears never came. Instead, a profound, chilling clarity washed over me, the anxiety I had carried for years, the constant need to please them, the desperate hope that one day they would love me for who I was. All of it simply evaporated in the cold air of my car. They did not see me as family. They saw me as a stain on their carefully curated image. Jasmine was the golden child, the beautiful entrepreneur, running a high-end hair and aesthetics spa. DeAndre was the successful businessman driving leased luxury cars. My parents were the wealthy philanthropists. And I was just the embarrassing secret they had to hide when important people came over. I did not scream. I did not march up to the door and pound on the wood. I leaned back in my seat, the engine idling, the heater finally starting to blow warm air against my frozen hands. I opened my banking app. The blue interface loaded, displaying my private accounts, my investment portfolios, and the family trust account I managed. I navigated to the automated payments section. My finger hovered over the screen. For 5 years, I had quietly subsidized their illusion of grandeur. I paid the exorbitant mortgage on the Atlanta mansion so my parents could host their lavish parties. I paid the commercial lease for Jasmine's upscale spa because her business was constantly operating in the red. and I paid the monthly balance on a high-limit credit card that DeAndre used to rent his luxury vehicles and buy designer suits under the guise of it being a corporate expense account I had secured for him through my firm. I tapped the first payment, the mansion mortgage. A prompt appeared asking if I was sure I wanted to cancel this recurring transfer. I clicked confirm. I scrolled down to the next item, the commercial lease for the spa. Jasmine always bragged on social media about being a self-made boss, completely oblivious to the fact that her landlord was a holding company I controlled, and that I was the one covering her rent every single month when her revenue fell short. I tapped cancel, confirm. Finally, I found the credit card account, DeAndre's lifeline, the plastic he flashed at expensive steakhouses to impress his fake friends. I did not just cancel the automatic payment. I went into the card settings and reported the card as permanently disabled due to unauthorized use. The account locked instantly. I sat there in the dark, watching the storm rage outside. In less than 3 minutes, I had completely dismantled the financial foundation of my family's entire existence. I had cut the puppet strings. They were inside eating turkey, pouring wine, completely unaware that the floor had just fallen out from under them. They thought they were protecting their wealthy aesthetic from their poor, embarrassing relative. They had no idea they had just locked the bank out in the cold. I put my car in reverse, backed out of the long, sweeping driveway, and drove away into the night. I did not look back. I drove to a luxury hotel downtown, checked into a penthouse suite, ordered room service, and slept better than I had in my entire life. The storm passed overnight. The morning sun was bright and unforgiving. At exactly 7 in the morning, my phone began to vibrate on the nightstand. I reached over and picked it up. The screen was flooded with notifications. There were 70 missed calls, 50 from Jasmine, 15 from my father, and 5 from DeAndre. There were also 5 frantic voicemails. The illusion had shattered much faster than I anticipated. Black Friday had arrived, and with it the brutal reality of their empty bank accounts. I smiled, took a sip of my coffee, and pressed play on the first voicemail. "Chloe, pick up the phone right now." It was DeAndre. His voice was breathless, panicked, lacking all the smooth, arrogant bravado he usually paraded around in. "I am at the private terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson. I was trying to charter the jet for the investors to head down to Miami for the weekend, and the concierge is telling me the black card is locked." "Locked, Chloe. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Call the bank. Fix this glitch before my guys get back from the lounge. Call me back right now." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. The rich, dark roast tasted like absolute victory. DeAndre was trying to charter a private jet, a jet he expected me to pay for to impress venture capitalists he was trying to scam. I deleted the message. The next voicemail was from my father. "Chloe, it is your father. I do not know what kind of tantrum you are throwing because you felt left out last night, but your mother went to the grocery store to pick up the catering order for the church gala this weekend, and her card was declined. The bank teller had the audacity to tell her the account was closed." Closed. "You need to stop this childish behavior immediately. Transfer the funds into the primary account within the hour. We have an image to maintain, and I will not have you ruining it because you are feeling sensitive. Call me." I laughed out loud. The sheer blinding entitlement was almost impressive. My father honestly believed that cutting off his access to my hard-earned money was a childish tantrum. He believed that my entire existence was meant to serve as a silent, invisible engine for his social climbing. I deleted that message too. There were 3 more voicemails, each one escalating in panic and anger. But before I could listen to the 4th, the phone vibrated in my hand. The screen flashed with an incoming call. It was Jasmine. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the moment before I finally swiped the green button and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. "Chloe, what is wrong with you?" Jasmine shrieked. She did not sound panicked. She sounded furious, dripping with the kind of bratty indignation she had perfected since childhood. Through the receiver, I could hear the unmistakable ambient noise of a high-end luxury boutique. Soft classical music playing in the background. The hushed, polite murmurs of sales associates. The clinking of hangers on metal racks. Jasmine was in Buckhead, the most expensive shopping district in Atlanta, right in the middle of the Black Friday rush. I am standing at the register at Saks, Jasmine hissed, her voice trembling with rage. I have my entire bridal party here. We are trying to buy the matching Cartier bracelets for the bachelorette trip next month, and the cashier just told me my card is declined. Declined, Chloe. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have the machine beep in front of all my friends? What is going on with the trust account? I remained completely silent, letting her frantic energy burn through the line. Are you even listening to me? Jasmine demanded. You obviously forgot to do the monthly transfer. I told you last week that the spa was having a slow month and I needed you to pad the family maintenance account. You know I have the investor dinner with DeAndre tonight. I need this handled right now. Call your wealth manager or whatever you do and push the money through. The cashier is staring at me, and Tiffany is asking if I need to borrow her card. I am literally shaking. I did not forget anything, I said quietly. My voice was calm, steady, and completely devoid of emotion. The contrast against her screeching was stark. Then why is the card declining? She snapped. Just fix it. Text me when the funds clear so I can run this again. The card is declining because the account is closed, Jasmine, I said. And the trust account you keep referring to, the one you think magically replenishes itself every 30 days, does not exist anymore. I liquidated it last night at 11:45. There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to comprehend the words I was saying. For her entire life, money was just a concept. It was something that simply appeared whenever she wanted it, provided by a sister she openly despised. She had zero understanding of financial mechanics, equity, or consequences. What do you mean you liquidated it? Jasmine asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The anger was suddenly replaced by a creeping, icy panic. You cannot do that. That is family money. That is the money for my spa, for Dad's mortgage. You cannot just take it. It is not family money, Jasmine, I explained, speaking slowly as if I were addressing a very slow child. It is my money. I earned it. I invested it. I grew it. I created the LLC that leases your commercial space. I paid the down payment on the house Mom and Dad live in. I funded DeAndre's fake corporate account. Every single dollar you have spent for the last 5 years came directly from my portfolio. There is no family trust. There is only me. I paused, letting the reality sink into her bones. I could hear the faint voice of a sales associate in the background, asking if everything was all right with the payment. You are lying, Jasmine stammered, though the conviction had completely left her voice. You are just doing this to punish us for last night. Look, I am sorry about Thanksgiving, okay? I was stressed. DeAndre had important people coming over, and you always dress so frumpy, and we just needed everything to look perfect. It was nothing personal. Just turn the cards back on Chloe, please. I have thousands of dollars of merchandise sitting on this counter, and everyone is watching me. Si, tati, si. Her apology was worse than the insult. She was not sorry for locking me out in a freezing sandstorm. She was sorry she had been caught at a luxury checkout counter without my wallet to back up her lies. She still thought this was just a temporary disagreement, a sibling rivalry that could be fixed with a fake apology and a fresh wire transfer. It was very personal, Jasmine, I said softly. I stood up from the hotel bed and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Atlanta skyline. I could see the exact high-rise building where my investment firm was headquartered. I owned a floor of that building. You stood on the porch of a house I pay for, and you looked me in the eyes and you told me I was not family. You told me the house was for family only. Chloe, please, Jasmine begged, her voice cracking. The reality was finally hitting her. She was stranded in Buckhead, surrounded by wealthy friends she had lied to, holding a useless piece of plastic. I am simply respecting your boundaries, I continued, my tone hardening into steel. You wanted a family-only holiday, you got it. But you need to understand how the real world works. You do not get to bite the hand that feeds you and then demand a second course. What am I supposed to tell the cashier? Jasmine sobbed. It was a pathetic sound, the golden child completely stripped of her armor. I do not care what you tell the cashier, I replied, but you should probably figure out how you are going to pay the commercial lease on your spa on Monday, because I canceled that automatic payment too. You canceled my lease, she screamed. The sound tearing through the phone. My business will go under, they will evict me. That sounds like a problem for a self-made boss, I said. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off my chest that I had been carrying for 3 decades. The script had officially flipped. I was no longer the victim of their cruelty. I was the architect of their reality check. I leaned into the phone, making sure my final words were crystal clear. I wanted them to echo in her head every time she looked at her empty bank account. Other people's money cannot buy things for family only, I said. Without waiting for her to respond, without listening to another second of her panicked sobbing, I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. I hung up. I left her stranded at the register in Saks Fifth Avenue, surrounded by her fake friends holding a declined card and facing the absolute destruction of her entire fabricated life. I placed the phone gently on the nightstand, walked into the marble bathroom and turned on the shower. The day was just getting started. The hot water cascaded over my shoulders, washing away the lingering chill of the previous night. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely weightless. The constant gnawing anxiety of keeping my family afloat, of managing their debts, of hiding my own success so they would not feel insecure was gone. I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself in a thick white robe. My phone was silent now. I had activated the Do Not Disturb feature. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them realize that the foundation of their entire existence was built on my silent suffering. I ordered breakfast from room service. A massive plate of eggs, bacon, and fresh fruit. I sat by the window, eating slowly, watching the city wake up below me. Somewhere out there, DeAndre was failing to secure his private jet. My father was failing to pay for his church catering. And Jasmine was desperately trying to explain to her wealthy friends why she suddenly could not afford a bracelet. They had pushed me away for years, thinking I was weak. They mistook my silence for submission. They mistook my financial support for an obligation. They were about to learn that my generosity was a privilege, and they had just permanently lost their access pass. I opened my laptop and pulled up my secure email client. I had a message waiting for me from my wealth manager confirming that all requested accounts had been successfully frozen and liquidated. The funds were safely moved into a private holding account under my sole name. The next step was legally securing the assets they were currently occupying. I typed out a quick message to my attorney, asking him to prepare the necessary documents for Monday morning. The foreclosure process on the mansion would take a little time, but the eviction notice for the spa could be served immediately. I closed the laptop, a genuine smile spreading across my face. The storm had passed, and the wreckage they left behind was entirely their own. I had barely closed my laptop when the silence of the hotel room was broken by a soft ringtone. I glanced at my phone resting on the nightstand. The caller ID displayed Aunt Maxine. My hand hesitated for a fraction of a second before I picked it up. Maxine was my mother's older sister, and she was the only person in that entire bloodline who possessed a shred of integrity. She was also the only person who knew the absolute truth about my financial situation and the lengths I had gone to in order to keep my parents from drowning. I swiped the screen and answered. "Hey, Auntie," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Chloe, thank God you picked up," Maxine whispered. Her voice was raspy, tight with anxiety, and I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background. "I am so sorry about last night. I am so incredibly sorry. If I had known what they were going to do when you pulled into the driveway, I would have walked out that front door and driven away with you." "I know you would have, Auntie," I replied. "It is okay. I am fine. I am actually more than fine. You do not need to put on a brave face for me, baby," she said. "I saw you standing out there in that storm. I saw Jasmine lock the door on you. I gave your mother a piece of my mind, packed up my pie, and left right after. I have been up all night sick to my stomach over it. But you need to know why they did it. You need to know what was actually happening inside that house." I leaned back against the plush headboard of the hotel bed, crossing my legs. "I am listening," I said. Maxine took a deep breath. "That dinner was not a family Thanksgiving. It was a theatrical production. DeAndre had invited a man named Marcus Sterling. He is a major venture capitalist from New York. Apparently, DeAndre has been trying to get a $5 million investment from him to launch some kind of luxury wellness franchise. He needed Sterling to believe he was already operating at a billionaire level. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. So they used my house as their movie set. Exactly. Maxine spat, her tone dripping with disgust. DeAndre walked that man through the foyer, pointing at the vaulted ceilings, bragging about how he imported the timber from Italy. He poured $500 bottles of wine and talked about his vast real estate portfolio. And Jasmine was right next to him, wearing a gown that looked like it belonged on a red carpet. She sat across from Mr. Sterling and looked him dead in the eye, taking full credit for the spa. She told him she bootstrapped the entire operation herself. She talked about her vision, her hard work, and her relentless grind. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. Jasmine had not worked a full 40-hour week in her entire life. When the spa was struggling to make payroll last year, she spent 2 weeks in Tulum on vacation, while I wired funds to keep her employees from quitting. I almost choked on my mashed potatoes, Maxine continued. I sat there watching them spin these ridiculous, extravagant lies. And your parents just nodded along. Thomas was puffing out his chest, acting like the proud patriarch of an empire. Brenda was playing the perfect society hostess. They were serving up this fantasy of the ultimate self-made wealthy family. And then I showed up, I said quietly. Maxine sighed heavily. Yes, you showed up. Brenda saw your headlights in the driveway. She looked out the window and saw you getting out of your Honda wearing that plain wool coat you love so much. Pure panic set in. DeAndre grabbed Jasmine by the arm and hissed that if Sterling saw you, the entire aesthetic would be ruined. He said you looked like a secretary. He said if Sterling started asking you questions, you would probably admit you actually work for a living, and it would destroy their image of being generational wealth. They locked me in a freezing sandstorm because my coat was not designer, I stated. I wanted to hear it out loud. I wanted the absolute absurdity of their vanity to echo in the room. They locked you out because they are ashamed of the very person who keeps a roof over their heads, Maxine said, her voice shaking with anger now. I looked your father in the eyes after Jasmine shut that door. I asked him how he could let his own flesh and blood stand out in the freezing cold. Do you know what he told me? He said you would understand. He said you were a practical girl and you would realize that this dinner was about securing Jasmine's future. A practical girl. That was their code word for the ugly duckling. The workhorse, the ATM machine. I could not hold my tongue anymore, Chloe, Maxine said, her breathing heavy. I looked around that dining room at the imported rugs, the crystal chandeliers, the massive oak table, and I just snapped. I pulled Thomas into the kitchen where Sterling could not hear us. I reminded him of exactly where he was 5 years ago. I reminded him of the tears he cried in my living room when the IRS was auditing him and his bank accounts were overdrawn by $50,000. 5 years ago, my father had made a series of catastrophic, arrogant investments in a failing logistics company. He lost everything. They were a week away from Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They were going to lose their old house, their cars, and most importantly, to them, their standing at the country club and the mega church. I was just starting to see massive returns on my private equity funds. I stepped in. I bought the new mansion in the Atlanta suburbs in cash through one of my holding companies. I set up a blind trust to handle the property taxes and utilities. I let my father tell his friends that he had simply upgraded his lifestyle. I let him put his name on the mailbox. I saved his life, and I let him keep his pride. He told me to lower my voice, Maxine recounted, sounding utterly exhausted. He actually shushed me. He said the past was the past, and that God had blessed him with a new season of abundance. I told him God did not buy this house, his neglected daughter did. I told him he was a fraud. I grabbed my coat and I walked out the back door. Chloe, you should have let them sink 5 years ago. You should have let them lose it all. They never learned their lesson. They just used your money to build a taller pedestal to look down on you from. They are off the pedestal now, Auntie, I said, my voice smooth and calm. What do you mean, Maxine asked, pausing her tirade. I watched them celebrating through the window last night, I explained. I read a text message Dad sent me by accident, complaining about my lack of style and how I was going to ruin their aesthetic. So I sat in my car, opened my banking app, and I canceled everything. I canceled the automated payment for the mansion. I canceled the commercial lease payment for Jasmine's spa. And I permanently locked DeAndre's black card. The silence on the line was profound. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the Atlanta traffic outside my hotel window. "You cut them off!" Maxine finally whispered, a tone of absolute awe creeping into her voice. "Completely," I confirmed. "Jasmine just called me screaming from Saks Fifth Avenue because her card was declined at the register in front of her friends. DeAndre left me a voicemail panicking because he cannot charter a private jet for his investor friends. And Dad is furious because the bank rejected his catering order for the church gala. They are currently drowning, and they do not even realize the water is rising." Maxine let out a sudden sharp bark of laughter. It was a joyous, vindicated sound. "Oh, my lord," she gasped. "Chloe, they are going to lose their minds. DeAndre is desperate. He told Sterling last night that he would provide full proof of assets by Monday morning to secure the $5 million investment. He needs the deed to the house and the ownership papers for the spa to prove his net worth." I smiled, looking at the city skyline. "DeAndre does not have the deed to the house, and Jasmine does not own the spa. I do." "They are going to come after you, Chloe," Maxine warned, though she still sounded gleeful. "Once they realize they cannot just bully you into turning the money back on, they are going to get vicious. Your mother will play the victim to anyone who will listen, and your father will try to intimidate you. DeAndre is a cornered animal right now. He needs that venture capital money because I suspect he owes a lot of dangerous people around town. He plays rich, but he is swimming in debt." "Let them come," I said calmly. "I have spent my entire adult life building ironclad legal fortresses. Let them try to break down my walls. I am meeting with my corporate attorney on Monday morning. We are filing the foreclosure notice on the mansion, and I am issuing a 3-day pay or quit eviction notice to the spa." Maxine let out a long, slow breath. "I am proud of you, baby. I really am. It breaks my heart that it had to come to this, but you cannot set yourself on fire to keep those people warm anymore. They deserve every single bit of reality that is about to hit them." "Thank you, Auntie," I said. "Just do me a favor. Do not tell them you spoke to me. Let them stay completely in the dark. Let them scramble." "My lips are sealed," Maxine promised. "You stay strong, Chloe. Call me if you need anything at all." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bed. The missing puzzle pieces had just fallen perfectly into place. The cruelty of last night was not just casual arrogance. It was a calculated, desperate move by a group of frauds trying to secure a $5 million payday from a New York investor. DeAndre had built a house of cards using my actual assets as his fake collateral. He needed to show Mr. Sterling the paperwork by Monday. But by Monday, the only paperwork DeAndre and my family would be receiving were legal notices stripping them of everything they claimed to own. They had locked me out to protect their aesthetic. I was going to lock them out of their entire lives. I let the phone sit on the nightstand for another hour, savoring the profound silence of my hotel suite. I ordered a second cup of coffee and watched the morning news, feeling completely detached from the chaos I knew was unfolding across the city. Finally, at exactly 9 in the morning, the screen lit up with a FaceTime audio call. The caller ID showed my father's name. I knew my mother would be hovering right next to him. They always hunted as a pair when they wanted to intimidate me. I took a deep breath, swiped the green icon, and put the phone on speaker, setting it gently on the glass coffee table. "Hello," I said. My voice was entirely neutral. "Chloe, what on earth is wrong with you?" My mother's voice pierced through the speaker, sharp and immediately accusatory. There was no hesitation, no soft greeting, and absolutely no apology for leaving me out in a freezing sandstorm the night before. "Are you out of your mind? Have you completely lost your grip on reality?" "Good morning, Mom," I replied calmly. "Do not good morning me," she snapped. Her breath was hitching, a classic tactic she used to simulate distress when she was actually just furious. "Jasmine is having a complete mental breakdown in the middle of a department store. DeAndre is pacing the floor, threatening to punch a hole in the wall. And your father just had his card declined at the caterer. You are throwing a childish, malicious temper tantrum and it stops right now. I took a sip of my coffee. I am not throwing a tantrum, Mom. I am simply restructuring my finances. Since I am not considered family, I decided I should no longer be funding the family lifestyle. It seemed like a very logical business decision. Oh, listen to you, my mother sneered. Her voice dripped with condescension. You think you are so smart. You think because you manage some little portfolios, you can play God with our lives. Let me tell you exactly what this is, Chloe. This is jealousy. Pure, bitter jealousy. I raised an eyebrow, though they could not see me. Jealousy. Yes, jealousy, she spat. You have always been insanely jealous of your sister. Jasmine has everything you do not. She has a handsome husband, she runs a successful high-end spa. She is beautiful, she is social, and she is building a legacy. And what do you have? You sit alone in your little apartment wearing your cheap clothes, working yourself to the bone with nothing to show for it. You saw her shining last night hosting that important investor, and you just could not handle it. You had to try and ruin her big moment because you are miserable. The sheer audacity of her delusion was almost breathtaking. She was defending Jasmine's fake empire, completely ignoring the fact that I was the one who bought the bricks, paid the staff, and kept the lights on. She truly believed the illusion they had created. Or perhaps she just needed to believe it to justify her blatant favoritism. Mom, Jasmine does not run a successful spa, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. Jasmine runs a deficit. I cover her losses every single month. DeAndre is not a successful businessman. He is a fraud leasing cars on my credit. Stop lying. My father's voice boomed through the speaker, cutting off my mother. He had clearly snatched the phone. I will not sit here and listen to you slander your sister and your brother-in-law just because you are feeling vindictive. I am not slandering anyone, Dad, I replied. I am stating financial facts. I do not care about your fabricated facts, he barked. His voice was thick with the kind of arrogant authority he usually reserved for his sermons at the dinner table. Listen to me very closely, Chloe. I do not have the time or the patience for this foolishness today. We have the annual charity gala at the church this Sunday. Pastor Jenkins has reserved the VIP table for us right at the front. I knew exactly what gala he was talking about. It was the social event of the year for their affluent congregation. It was a place to see and be seen, a place where the wealthiest members of the church flaunted their prosperity under the guise of charitable giving. We have publicly pledged a $10,000 donation to the building fund. My father continued, his tone turning desperate and demanding. We are supposed to present the check on stage. The entire congregation is expecting it. Do you have any idea what it will look like if we do not deliver that check? It will be a humiliation. Our reputation will be completely destroyed. You are going to log into your little banking app or whatever it is you use, and you are going to reactivate my primary card immediately. And then you are going to transfer the $10,000 for the church. I stared at the phone. He was not asking for a favor. He was issuing a command. He truly believed he was entitled to my money to buy his social status. You want me to give you $10,000 so you can pretend to be a philanthropist in front of Pastor Jenkins? I asked, clarifying the absurdity of his demand. It is your duty to honor your father and mother. He quoted, his voice rising in righteous indignation. We gave you life. We raised you. The least you can do is support this family when we need it. You have the money, Chloe. Do not be greedy. Greedy. The word echoed in the quiet hotel room. I had bought them a $2 million home to save them from bankruptcy, and I was the greedy one. I am not turning the cards back on Dad, I said firmly. I am not paying for the church donation. I am not paying the mortgage, and I am not paying Jasmine's rent. The free ride is over. There was a sharp gasp from my mother in the background. My father's breathing became heavy, ragged with rage. You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat, my father growled. He dropped all pretense of being the righteous patriarch. You are going to fix this right now. If you do not turn those accounts back on by noon today, there will be severe consequences. Consequences, I repeated. What kind of consequences? We will cut you off completely. My mother chimed in, her voice shrill and hysterical. You will no longer be welcome in our home. You will not be invited to Christmas. You will not be part of this family. We will disown you, Chloe. Do you understand me? You will have no one. You will be completely alone. They played their final card. The ultimate threat. For years, the fear of being abandoned by them had kept me trapped in a cycle of financial abuse and emotional neglect. They thought the threat of disownment would shatter me. They expected me to start crying, to beg for their forgiveness, to frantically wire the money just to buy back their conditional affection. I let the silence stretch for 5 long seconds. I looked at my reflection in the dark television screen across the room. I did not look like a scared, lonely girl anymore. I looked like a woman who had finally found her absolute power. I accept your terms, I said quietly. The line went dead silent. The heavy breathing stopped. The frantic energy completely vanished. What did you just say? My father asked. His voice was no longer booming. It was small, confused, and suddenly very unsure. I said I accept your terms, I repeated, enunciating every single syllable clearly. You do not have to disown me because I am officially resigning from this family. You made it very clear last night that I was not welcome. Now you are threatening to abandon me if I do not pay you a $10,000 ransom to pretend to love me. That is not a family. That is a hostage situation. And I do not negotiate with terrorists. Chloe, now wait a minute. My father started, his tone suddenly shifting from rage to a panicked backpedaling. Let us not say things we cannot take back. We are just stressed. You know we love you. No, you love my credit limit, I corrected him. I am hanging up now. Do not try to contact me again. I will only be communicating through my attorney from this point forward. Good luck at the church gala. I hope Pastor Jenkins accepts us, Chloe. Do not you dare hang up this phone, my mother shrieked. You turn that money back on. I reached out and tapped the red button, cutting off her hysterical scream mid-sentence. The room plunged back into total blissful silence. I picked up the phone, navigated to their contact profiles, and pressed block on my father's number. Then I pressed block on my mother's number. I went ahead and blocked Jasmine and DeAndre as well. I set the phone down and let out a long, slow exhale. It was done. The umbilical cord of guilt and obligation was completely severed. They had handed me the exact excuse I needed to walk away clean. They tried to use the threat of isolation as a weapon, completely failing to realize that isolation from their toxicity was exactly what I had been craving my entire life. But I knew them too well to think this was over. Narcissists do not just accept defeat quietly when their supply is cut off. They were desperate, and desperate people make sloppy, aggressive mistakes. By blocking their numbers, I had forced them into a corner. They could no longer abuse me in private. They were going to have to take their circus public, and I was more than ready to watch them perform. I poured myself another cup of coffee, feeling a deep, radiating sense of peace. Let them wage their war. My fortress was already built. The rest of my Saturday progressed in absolute, uninterrupted peace. I spent the afternoon sitting at the mahogany desk in my hotel suite, finalizing the legal documents my attorney had messaged over, and drinking sparkling water. I felt entirely detached from the chaos I knew was burning through my family's lives. I had effectively starved the fire of its oxygen by blocking their numbers. But toxic people are incredibly predictable. When they lose direct access to their primary victim, they inevitably seek out a public audience to play the martyr. It started around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My phone, which had been blissfully silent since the morning, suddenly vibrated. Then it vibrated again. And again. It was not a phone call or a text message. It was a relentless cascade of social media notifications. I unlocked my screen and saw dozens of alerts from Facebook. I rarely use the platform, keeping my profile active mostly to monitor local business groups and the occasional neighborhood update. But today my notification tab was lit up in bright red. I had been tagged in a video. Hundreds of comments were flooding in, along with a tidal wave of direct messages from people I had not spoken to in years. I clicked on the notification that showed I had been tagged in a post in the Greater Zion Fellowship group. This was the private Facebook page for my parents' massive megachurch, a digital congregation of over 4,000 active members. The video loaded on my screen. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. My mother, father, and Jasmine were sitting on the expensive velvet sofa in the living room of the mansion I owned. The lighting was deliberately dim, creating a somber, melancholic atmosphere. Jasmine was not wearing her usual heavy makeup or designer clothes. She was dressed in a plain, oversized gray sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, looking intentionally exhausted and fragile. My mother sat next to her, clutching a crumpled tissue, her eyes red and puffy, as if she had been weeping for hours. My father sat on the other side, leaning forward with his hands clasped together, playing the role of the weary, heartbroken patriarch, holding his devastated family together. I tapped the screen to unmute the video. "Church family," my father began, his voice thick with rehearsed sorrow. "We come to you today with incredibly heavy hearts. We have always prided ourselves on being a family that stands together in faith, but right now, we are facing a spiritual attack from within our own home. We need your prayers." My mother dabbed her eyes with the tissue, letting out a perfectly timed trembling sigh. "Many of you know our eldest daughter, Chloe." My father continued, looking directly into the camera lens. "We love Chloe deeply, but lately she has been struggling. She has lost her way. Last night, during our family Thanksgiving dinner, Chloe suffered a severe mental breakdown." I raised an eyebrow, staring at the screen. A mental breakdown. That was their angle. It was brilliant in its cruelty. By framing me as mentally unstable, they instantly discredited anything I might say in my defense. "She has always struggled with feeling inadequate," my mother chimed in, her voice shaking. "We have tried everything to help her, to include her, to make her feel loved. But the jealousy she harbors toward her sister has completely consumed her. Seeing Jasmine so happy, seeing her beautiful marriage to DeAndre, and watching her spa business flourish, it just broke something inside Chloe's mind." The camera panned slightly, focusing on Jasmine. She looked down at her hands, squeezing her eyes shut, until a single tear rolled down her cheek. "I just wanted us to be a family," Jasmine whispered, her voice cracking with fake emotion. But Chloe could not handle it. She left the house in a rage last night. And then she did something unforgivable. Because of her job in finance, she had access to some of our personal information. In her manic state, she somehow hacked into DeAndre's corporate accounts. She stole his financial data and managed to freeze his banking access. She even targeted my spa, trying to disrupt my commercial lease payments out of pure spite. I let out a sharp breath. The audacity of the lie was staggering. They were sitting inside a house I paid for, claiming I had hacked them, when in reality, I had simply stopped giving them my own money. They were weaponizing their own financial illiteracy to paint me as a cybercriminal. DeAndre is working with the bank and the authorities to resolve this identity theft, my father said, his tone turning grave and protective. But the damage is severe. Chloe has actively tried to ruin her sister's livelihood and destroy my son-in-law's reputation. We are heartbroken. We have tried to reach out to her to get her psychiatric help, but she has blocked all of our numbers and vanished. We are asking for our church community to pray for Chloe's soul and to pray for our family as we navigate this devastating betrayal." The video ended with my mother burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly. I sat back in my chair, staring at the frozen frame of the video. It was a spectacular performance. They had completely inverted reality. They had preemptively struck, creating a narrative where they were the innocent victims of a bitter, deranged spinster who was trying to steal their hard-earned success. I scrolled down to look at the comments under the video. There were over 300 of them, and the number was climbing by the second. The church community had swallowed the lie whole. Sister Beatrice, the head of the women's ministry, wrote, "Praying for your beautiful family. We always knew there was a dark spirit in that girl. She never dressed right for service and always kept to herself. She needs an exorcism." Deacon Miller commented, "Stay strong, Thomas. Do not let the devil destroy what you have built. If you need anything for the gala tomorrow, the congregation stands with you. That girl will face the Lord's judgment for what she has done to her sister." I closed the Facebook app and opened my direct messages. The vitriol was even worse in private. People who had barely spoken 2 words to me in 10 years were suddenly experts on my character and my mental health. An old high school friend of Jasmine's sent me a message saying, "You are a disgusting, bitter spinster. You have always been jealous of Jazz because she is gorgeous and successful and you are nothing. Trying to ruin her business because no man wants you is pathetic. Get help, psycho." Another message from a woman in the church choir read, "You should be ashamed of yourself. Your parents gave you everything. To steal from your own brother-in-law is a federal crime. I hope they lock you up and throw away the key. You are a broke, miserable woman." Message after message poured in. They called me ungrateful. They called me a thief. They called me crazy. They picked apart my looks, my marital status, and my perceived lack of wealth, using every insecurity my family had ever projected onto me as ammunition. My parents had unleashed an entire community of self-righteous bullies to do their dirty work. They thought the sheer volume of public shaming would break me. They thought I would panic, unblock their numbers, and beg for them to take the video down in exchange for turning the money back on. But they had fundamentally miscalculated who they were dealing with. I did not feel a single ounce of shame. I did not feel the urge to cry, and I certainly did not feel the need to jump into the comment section to defend myself. Getting into a mudslinging contest on Facebook with a bunch of hypocritical churchgoers was a waste of my energy. Instead, I looked at the situation through the cold, calculating lens of a private equity manager. What my family had just done was not just mean. It was highly actionable. They had publicly accused me of a federal crime. They had claimed I hacked banking systems, committed identity theft, and interfered with a commercial business. They had published these claims to an audience of thousands. They had documented their own defamation in high-definition video. I opened the screen recording application on my phone. I pressed record and slowly scrolled through the video, capturing every second of their fabricated claims. Then I scrolled through the comment section, recording the public damage to my reputation. I opened my direct messages and took screenshots of the most vile threats and accusations, making sure the names and timestamps were clearly visible. I gathered all the digital evidence, attached it to a secure file, and drafted a new email to my corporate attorney. The subject line read, "Additional evidence for Sunday, defamation and libel." I attached the video and the screenshots and typed a brief message. "Please add these to the file. They are publicly claiming I stole from them and hacked their accounts. Let us make sure we have the forensic accounting reports completely finalized by tomorrow morning. I want every single dollar traced." I hit send. I set the phone face down on the desk. Let them have their Saturday. Let them soak in the sympathy of the congregation. Let Jasmine read the comments praising her bravery. Let my father revel in the supportive messages from the deacons. They were digging their own grave in the public eye, shoveling the dirt as fast as they could, completely unaware that I was standing right behind them with the headstone. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted the entire church community to be involved in our family business. I smiled, looking out the hotel window at the darkening Atlanta sky. If they wanted the congregation involved, I was more than happy to oblige. Tomorrow was Sunday, and church was going to be an absolute revelation. My phone chimed, pulling my attention away from the darkening skyline. It was an incoming email to my secure corporate address. The subject line was written entirely in capital letters, accompanied by a high-importance flag. Urgent legal communication regarding tortious interference. I sat back down at the mahogany desk and opened the message. There was a PDF attachment titled "Cease and Desist." I clicked it, allowing the document to load on my screen. I expected to see the letterhead of a serious, high-powered Atlanta law firm. Instead, the logo at the top belonged to Leonard Higgins, attorney at law. I did a quick background search on the name. Leonard Higgins was a personal injury lawyer whose office was located in a strip mall right next to a discount laundromat and a vape shop. DeAndre was officially panicking. He could not afford a real corporate litigator, so he had scraped the bottom of the barrel, hoping a cheap legal threat would scare me into submission. I began to read the letter. It was a masterpiece of legal incompetence. Mr. Higgins, clearly operating on whatever frantic lies DeAndre had fed him, accused me of unauthorized access to corporate accounts, malicious destruction of property, and tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. The letter demanded that I immediately restore all funding, reactivate all credit lines, and transfer a sum of $500,000 in compensatory damages within 24 hours. If I failed to comply, Mr. Higgins threatened to file an emergency injunction and pursue maximum criminal penalties for corporate espionage. I actually laughed out loud in the empty hotel room. The letter was completely toothless. You cannot claim tortious interference when the person you are suing is the sole legal owner of the assets in question. I could not illegally access DeAndre's credit accounts because those accounts were entirely in my name, backed by my personal equity with DeAndre listed only as an authorized user. I had every legal right to terminate his access at any given second. The threat of an emergency injunction was just legal jargon designed to sound terrifying to an uneducated civilian. But behind the ridiculous posturing, the letter revealed something incredibly important. It revealed the sheer scale of DeAndre's desperation. He was asking for $500,000. He did not just need his credit cards turned back on to buy groceries. He needed a massive injection of liquid cash, and he needed it immediately. I closed the PDF and leaned back in my chair. Why was DeAndre suddenly bleeding cash? Aunt Maxine had told me he needed to show the venture capitalist, Mr. Sterling, his property deeds and proof of assets by Monday morning. But Sterling was the one supposed to be investing $5 million into DeAndre. DeAndre should not need $500,000 in cash just to secure a meeting, unless, of course. The illusion was much more expensive to maintain than I realized. My train of thought was interrupted by a second notification on my laptop. This one was not an email. It was a high-priority alert from a commercial property monitoring service I retained for all my real estate holdings. Whenever a title change, a lien, or a hard credit check was initiated against any of my properties, the service immediately flagged it and sent an alert to my private server. The alert was flashing red. Property address flagged. A new filing had just been initiated with the county clerk office regarding the commercial building that housed Jasmine's spa. My heart rate remained perfectly steady, but my eyes narrowed. I clicked on the alert and logged directly into the county clerk portal using my secure credentials. I pulled up the most recent filings for the spa's address. What I saw made my blood run absolutely cold, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief at DeAndre's staggering stupidity. DeAndre had just submitted paperwork for a hard money bridge loan. For those who do not operate in the financial sector, a hard money loan is a short-term, incredibly high-interest loan usually issued by private predatory lenders. They do not care about your credit score. They only care about the collateral you put up. If you default, they take the property immediately, no questions asked. DeAndre had gone to a firm called Apex Capital Solutions. He had applied for a $200,000 cash advance, agreeing to an extortionate 40% interest rate. But the loan amount was not the shocking part. The shocking part was the collateral he had used to secure the cash. I opened the scanned PDF of the loan application filed with the county. There, at the bottom of the document, was a forged deed to the commercial property. DeAndre had fabricated legal documents claiming that he and Jasmine were the sole managing members of the LLC that owned the building. He had literally forged my signature on a fake transfer of ownership notarized by God knows who, and handed it over to a predatory lender to get $200,000 in fast cash. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together. DeAndre was drowning in debt. The luxury cars, the designer suits, the lavish dinners at steakhouses, none of it was real. He had been using my credit card to float his lifestyle, but he had clearly been borrowing money from dangerous people on the side to fund whatever hidden vices he had. When I cut off the black card on Thursday night, his entire house of cards collapsed. The people he owed money to probably started calling. He needed cash to pay them off, and he needed cash to rent the private jet and impress Mr. Sterling this weekend. So, in a state of absolute blind panic, he committed multiple federal felonies. He forged a property deed. He committed wire fraud by submitting the fake documents electronically. and he committed bank fraud by securing a loan against an asset he did not own. He took the $200,000 from Apex Capital, probably thinking he could use the venture capital money from Mr. Sterling on Monday to quickly pay off the hard money loan before anyone noticed. It was the classic desperate move of a cornered con artist. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, assuming he was smart enough to outrun the law. I downloaded the forged deed, the loan application, and the alert notifications. I saved everything to an encrypted flash drive. DeAndre thought he was playing a game of family intimidation. He thought sending a cheap lawyer after me would distract me from checking the actual property records. He thought I was just a naive, jealous sister throwing a tantrum over Thanksgiving dinner. He had no idea he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him completely and permanently. I picked up my phone and called my corporate attorney. It was a Saturday evening, but when you pay a retainer as large as mine, your lawyer answers on the first ring. "Good evening, Chloe." His deep, calm voice came through the speaker. "I received the defamation evidence you sent over earlier. I have added it to the file. We are completely prepared for Monday." "We have a massive change of plans," I said, keeping my voice low and precise. "Monday is too late. The timeline just accelerated. I need you to pull the county clerk filings for the commercial property on West Peachtree Street immediately." I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking on his end. "Give me 1 second. Okay, I am in. What am I looking for?" "Look at the filing submitted exactly 45 minutes ago by Apex Capital Solutions," I instructed. The line was quiet for a few moments as he read through the documents. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath. "Chloe, this is a forged deed." He listed himself as the primary equity holder. "He just leveraged your property for a $200,000 predatory loan." "Yes, he did," I replied. "This escalates things far beyond a simple civil eviction or a family dispute," my attorney said, his professional tone shifting into something much more intense. "This is grand larceny. This is federal wire fraud. I need to contact the district attorney office immediately. We need to freeze this loan disbursement before the funds clear into his account." "Do not freeze the funds," I commanded softly. What he asked clearly shocked. "Chloe, if they disperse that cash, it will be a nightmare to track down, and your property will temporarily have a fraudulent lien on it." "I can easily prove the lien is fraudulent," I said. "I want the money to clear into his account. I want the crime to be fully completed. If you stop the transfer now, he can claim it was a misunderstanding or a clerical error. If he takes possession of the cash, there is no defense." The trap snapped shut. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You are playing a very dangerous game." "I am playing a winning game," I corrected him. "I want you to draft a comprehensive forensic report detailing the forgery, the exact timeline of the loan application, and his history of embezzlement from the spa. I want hard copies printed out and placed in a sealed folder." "When do you need the hard copies?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Meet me at the hotel at 8. Bring your security personnel. We are going to church." "Understood," he said. "I will see you in the morning." I ended the call. The hotel room was completely dark now, illuminated only by the glow of the city lights pouring through the window. DeAndre had tried to terrify me with a fake lawsuit. He tried to bully me into giving up my peace. Instead, he had walked blindly into a federal prison sentence. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the outfit I had selected for the next day. It was not the plain, unassuming clothing I usually wore to appease my parents. It was a perfectly tailored charcoal gray designer suit. It was the armor of a woman who owned the room before she even stepped inside. My parents wanted to put on a show for the congregation. They wanted to stand on the stage and present a fake $10,000 donation to maintain their pathetic social hierarchy. They wanted everyone to look at them. Tomorrow, they were going to get exactly what they wanted. Everyone was going to look at them. But they were not going to see a perfect, wealthy family. They were going to see a group of frauds entirely stripped of their power, exposed to the bone with absolutely nowhere to hide. At exactly 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, there was a sharp, authoritative knock on the heavy oak door of my hotel suite. I had been awake since 5, drinking black coffee and watching the sun rise over the Atlanta skyline, feeling a profound sense of calm. I walked over and opened the door. My corporate attorney, Harrison Cole, stood in the hallway. Harrison was a formidable man in his late 50s, a senior partner at one of the most ruthless litigation firms in the state. He did not handle petty family squabbles. He handled corporate takeovers, multi-million-dollar asset recoveries, and white-collar criminal prosecution. Flanking him were two massive men in dark suits. Private security contractors he had brought along precisely as I requested. "Good morning, Chloe," Harrison said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He stepped into the room, signaling the security details to wait by the door. He placed a thick black leather briefcase on the glass dining table. "Good morning, Harrison," I replied, taking a seat opposite him. "I see you brought the heavy artillery." Harrison did not smile. He clicked the locks on the briefcase and flipped it open. When dealing with federal wire fraud, forged property deeds, and a family history of volatile entitlement, I prefer to leave absolutely nothing to chance. I have everything you requested, finalized, certified, and ready for immediate deployment. He pulled out 3 distinct, heavily labeled manila folders and laid them flat on the glass surface. These folders contained the absolute destruction of my family's fabricated reality. We were not just going to embarrass them. We were going to legally annihilate their ability to ever use my assets again. "Let us review the operating agreements first," I said, pointing to the thickest folder on the left. Harrison opened it, sliding a stack of notarized documents toward me. "This is the Master Operating Agreement for Zenith Aesthetics, LLC, the holding company that owns your sister's spa. As you know, the documents clearly establish you as the sole managing member with 100% equity. Jasmine is classified purely as an at-will salaried employee acting as the daily operations manager. She holds 0 ownership stakes, 0 voting rights, and 0 claim to the commercial lease." I traced my finger over the signature lines. For 5 years, Jasmine had paraded around Atlanta telling anyone who would listen that she was a self-made mogul. She printed business cards calling herself the founder and CEO. She did interviews with local lifestyle blogs about the hardships of building an empire from the ground up. In reality, I had legally structured the company so that I could terminate her employment and seize control of the physical location at a moment's notice. "Because you canceled the automated lease payment on Thursday, the LLC is now officially in breach of its commercial lease agreement with the building management, which you also own through a separate holding company," Harrison explained, outlining the beautiful legal loophole I had created. This allowed me to legally issue a 3-day pay or quit eviction notice this morning. The notice was electronically served to the spa's official email address at exactly 7 a.m., and a physical copy was taped to the front glass doors of the business 10 minutes ago by a process server. "Jasmine has 72 hours to produce the back rent, which she cannot do because you froze her accounts, or the locks will be changed by the sheriff." "Perfect," I said softly. She wanted a business. Now she gets to experience the reality of business overhead. "Move on to the house." Harrison closed the first folder and opened the second. This contained the deed to the sprawling suburban mansion my parents were currently using to host their fake society dinners. 5 years ago, when your father was facing bankruptcy, he signed over full financial power of attorney to you, Harrison stated, tapping a piece of paper bearing my father's desperate scribbled signature. "He did this so you could secretly negotiate with his creditors and hide his financial collapse from his country club friends." What he conveniently forgot or simply failed to read was that the power of attorney agreement remained active indefinitely unless formally revoked in writing. He thought I was just his personal accountant. I noted a bitter smile crossing my lips. He thought I existed to balance his checkbook and make his problems disappear. "His ignorance is your ultimate leverage," Harrison said. "Because he never revoked the power of attorney, and because you purchased the new mansion entirely through your private trust, you are the sole legal owner of the property. Your parents are legally classified as month-to-month tenants paying 0 rent. However, you structured the deed to require a monthly maintenance fee to be paid from their personal accounts into the trust, a fee you have been secretly funding yourself. By cutting off their automated payments on Thursday, I forced them into default," I finished the thought. "Precisely," Harrison confirmed. "They missed the payment, Since they have no actual equity in the home, the trust has officially initiated foreclosure proceedings. The notice of default was filed electronically with the county clerk an hour ago. The public record now reflects that Thomas and Brenda are in default and facing imminent eviction from the property. Their wealthy facade is legally dead. I felt a cold wave of satisfaction wash over me. My parents had spent my entire life making me feel like I was taking up too much space in their perfect world. Now I was legally removing their space entirely. "Now for the main event," Harrison said, his tone shifting into something significantly darker. He opened the third folder. This was the folder containing the forensic accounting report on DeAndre alongside the hard evidence of his federal crimes. Harrison laid out the forged deed I had discovered the night before. "This is the fraudulent collateral DeAndre submitted to Apex Capital Solutions to secure his $200,000 hard money loan. I had my team run a deep background check on Apex Capital this morning. They are not a traditional lender. They are a shadow banking firm known for aggressive, often violent asset recovery. They do not send polite letters when you default. They send men with crowbars to seize the property. DeAndre borrowed money from sharks, I observed, looking at the forged signature on the document. He used my property as bait. And the trap has officially snapped shut," Harrison replied grimly. "I verified the wire transfer an hour ago. Apex Capital disbursed the $200,000 directly into DeAndre's private offshore account. The crime is fully complete. He has committed grand larceny, wire fraud, and forgery. If he had not received the money, his cheap lawyer might have been able to argue it was a clerical error. But because he took possession of the cash, he is facing a mandatory minimum federal prison sentence." Harrison then pulled out a spreadsheet covered in highlighted red lines. "And that is not all. My forensic accountants worked through the night analyzing the payroll accounts for Zenith Aesthetics. DeAndre has been treating your sister's spa as his personal piggy bank over the last 14 months. He has systematically embezzled over $120,000 from the corporate operating fund. He routed the money through a series of fake vendor invoices for spa equipment that was never delivered." "Where did the money go?" I asked, my eyes scanning the endless rows of fraudulent transactions. Harrison flipped to the last page, which contained a series of leasing agreements and bank statements. He used the embezzled funds to lease a luxury penthouse apartment in Midtown Atlanta under a shell company. He also purchased a brand new Mercedes-Benz GLE, registered in the name of a 24-year-old cocktail waitress named Kiara. I stared at the documents in absolute silence. DeAndre was not just a financial parasite. He was actively cheating on my sister, funding his secret double life with the money I was pumping into her business to keep it afloat. Jasmine had spent Thanksgiving dinner looking down on me, bragging to a venture capitalist about her perfect marriage and her successful empire, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was stealing her payroll to fund a mistress. "Does Mr. Sterling, the venture capitalist, know about any of this yet?" I asked carefully, gathering the papers and placing them back into the folders. "I spoke with Mr. Sterling's legal counsel at 6 o'clock this morning." Harrison confirmed, a sharp, predatory smile finally breaking across his face. "I informed them that the assets DeAndre was claiming as collateral were entirely fabricated. I also sent them a redacted copy of the forged deed to prove DeAndre was currently engaging in active federal fraud." Mr. Sterling was livid. "He despises being played for a fool. He will be terminating all negotiations with DeAndre immediately." I stood up from the table, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of total victory. The ticking time bomb was set. The eviction notice was on the spa door. The foreclosure was on the public record. The evidence of embezzlement and federal fraud was printed, sealed, and ready to be exposed. My family had spent 32 years treating me like a stepping stone. They thought they could step on me forever without consequence. But they failed to realize that when you step on a stone long enough, it eventually turns into a boulder that crushes you. "Pack it up, Harrison," I said, smoothing down the front of my tailored gray suit. "The service starts at 10. I want to arrive right as Pastor Jenkins calls my father up to the stage for the charity donation." Harrison nodded, placing the folders back into the briefcase and snapping the locks shut. The two security contractors stepped away from the door, standing at attention. Are you ready for this? Chloe Harrison asked, his voice softening just a fraction. Once we walk into that church and present this evidence, there is no going back. The community will see everything. The family dynamic will be permanently destroyed. The family dynamic was destroyed the moment they locked me out in a sandstorm to protect their aesthetic, I replied coldly. I am just delivering the obituary. Let us go to church. I picked up my leather handbag and walked past Harrison, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor of the hotel suite. The two security guards opened the door for me, their massive frames creating an impenetrable wall between me and anyone who might try to intervene today. We walked down the silent carpeted hallway toward the elevators. With every step I took, the remnants of the scared, invisible girl I used to be were left further and further behind. By the time the elevator doors opened to the lobby, I was no longer Chloe the outcast. I was the landlord, the creditor, and the executioner, and I was on my way to collect exactly what I was owed. The drive from the hotel to Greater Zion Fellowship took exactly 20 minutes. I sat in the back of the blacked-out SUV Harrison had arranged, watching the Sunday morning traffic glide by. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere that usually accompanied my family interactions. But today I felt nothing but a sharp clinical focus. Greater Zion Fellowship was not just a church. It was a massive, sprawling complex of wealth and social signaling. The parking lot was filled with luxury vehicles, a sea of Mercedes, BMWs, and Range Rovers reflecting the morning sun. As my driver pulled up to the main entrance, I could see the congregants flowing up the grand stone steps dressed in their Sunday best. This was a place where faith was measured by the size of your hat and the label on your suit. Harrison stepped out first, adjusting his suit jacket. The two security contractors exited the front doors immediately, taking up positions on either side of me as I stepped onto the pavement. My charcoal gray suit fit flawlessly. I wore minimal jewelry, just a simple pair of diamond studs and my watch. It was the epitome of quiet luxury, a sharp departure from the loud, branded aesthetic my family desperately clung to. We walked up the steps, bypassing the greeting lines, and pushed through the heavy wooden double doors into the main foyer. The sanctuary was immense, capable of holding thousands of people. The choir was already on stage, their voices echoing off the vaulted ceilings, accompanied by a full live band. Giant high-definition screens flanked the pulpit, currently displaying the logo for the annual charity building fund. I paused at the back of the center aisle, letting my eyes adjust to the bright theatrical lighting. It only took me a few seconds to locate them. My family was seated in the VIP section, the velvet-roped pews directly in front of the stage reserved for the highest donors and the most prominent members of the church hierarchy. My father was wearing a tailored three-piece suit, sitting tall and proud, a look of absolute sanctimonious grace plastered on his face. Resting against the pew next to him was a massive, oversized novelty check made of thick foam board. The amount written in bold black marker was $10,000. My mother sat next to him wearing an extravagant wide-brimmed hat and a royal blue dress. She was nodding along to the music, her hands raised in performative worship. Jasmine was beside her, dressed in a stunning emerald green gown that looked entirely out of place for a Sunday morning service, but perfectly suited for a red carpet. And then there was DeAndre. He was wearing a sharp burgundy blazer, but even from the back of the sanctuary, I could see the tension in his shoulders. He was fidgeting, constantly checking his phone, completely unaware that his offshore bank account had just received a loan that was going to send him to federal prison. They looked like the perfect portrait of blessed prosperity. The entire congregation was looking at them with admiration and respect. They had successfully sold the lie. "Let us go," I said quietly to Harrison. We began our walk down the center aisle. At first, only the people in the back rows noticed us. But as we moved further down the aisle, the shift in the atmosphere became palpable. It started as a low murmur, a rustle of silk, and turning heads. The Facebook video my parents posted the day before had done its job. Nearly everyone in this room had seen it. They had read the comments. They had spent their Saturday gossiping about my supposed mental breakdown, my jealousy, and my criminal hacking. They expected to see a broken, hysterical woman dragging herself into the church to beg for forgiveness. They expected the villain of their weekend drama. Instead, they saw me, walking with the perfectly measured stride of an executive, flanked by a high-powered corporate litigator, and two massive men with earpieces who looked like they belonged to a Secret Service detail. The murmurs turned into loud, confused whispers. People physically leaned out of their pews to stare. The illusion my parents had so carefully crafted was instantly disrupted by my sheer, undeniable presence. We were about halfway down the aisle when my mother finally turned around. I watched the exact moment her brain registered what she was seeing. The performative worship instantly dropped from her face. Her eyes widened in absolute unfiltered panic. She grabbed my father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit sleeve. My father turned and the color completely drained from his face. Jasmine and DeAndre followed their gaze for a split second. The four of them looked like deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. But narcissists possess a terrifying ability to adapt to an audience. They realized the entire congregation was watching this interaction. They could not look terrified. They could not look angry. They had to play the roles they had established in their tearful Facebook video. They had to be the loving, heartbroken, forgiving Christian family. My mother elbowed Jasmine sharply in the ribs. Instantly, Jasmine's face morphed into an expression of profound sorrow. She stood up, smoothing down her emerald gown, and rushed out of the VIP pew, stepping directly into the center aisle to block my path. My mother was right behind her, a fresh tissue suddenly appearing in her hand. Chloe Jasmine cried out, her voice pitched loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "Oh my God, you came! You actually came!" She lunged forward, throwing her arms around my neck in a dramatic sweeping hug. My mother arrived a second later, wrapping her arms around both of us, creating a tight, suffocating circle of fake family affection. The congregation let out a collective sigh of approval. It looked like a beautiful, redemptive moment of reconciliation. But inside that tight embrace, where the microphones and the congregation could not hear, the reality was entirely different. Jasmine's hands gripped my shoulders like vice grips. Her face was pressed against my ear, her breath hot and frantic. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Who are these men? You need to leave right now before you ruin everything." My mother squeezed my waist, her voice equally vicious as she leaned into my other ear. "Turn the cards back on Chloe," she whispered rapidly. "Turn the money on right now and walk out those doors. If you leave quietly, we will tell Pastor Jenkins you are getting psychiatric help. We will forgive you. Do not embarrass us in front of these people." They were still trying to negotiate. They were still trying to use shame and social pressure to bend me to their will. They honestly thought they still had leverage. They thought the threat of public embarrassment would force me to retreat. I did not hug them back. I kept my arms perfectly straight at my sides, my posture rigid and unyielding. I waited for them to finish their frantic, whispered threats. "I am not here to be forgiven." "Mom," I whispered back, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "I am here to collect." I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the security guard on my left. The contractor stepped forward. He did not shove them, but he used his massive frame to step smoothly between my mother Jasmine and myself. He placed a firm, immovable hand on Jasmine's arm and gently peeled her off me. The other guard did the same to my mother, establishing a solid physical barrier of 3 feet between us. "Ma'am, please step back," the guard said to Jasmine, his voice polite but carrying an undertone of absolute authority that brooked no argument. Jasmine stumbled back a step, looking completely bewildered. Her fake tears vanished, replaced by genuine shock. Nobody had ever physically denied her what she wanted. My mother gasped, clutching her chest, trying to play up the victim angle for the audience, but the confusion was evident in her eyes. I smoothed the lapels of my gray suit, completely unbothered by their theatrical display. "What is going on here?" my father demanded, stepping out of the pew and walking toward us. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to assert his patriarchal dominance over the situation. "Chloe, call off these goons immediately. This is the house of the Lord." "These men are not goons, Dad," I said, raising my voice just enough so the surrounding rows could hear me clearly. "They are my legal security detail. And this gentleman next to me is Harrison Cole, my corporate attorney." Harrison offered a tight, terrifyingly polite smile to my father. Thomas, it is a pleasure to finally meet you under such public circumstances. My father stopped dead in his tracks. The mention of a corporate attorney hit him like a physical blow. He looked from Harrison to the briefcases and then finally to me. The righteous anger drained out of him, replaced by the dawning realization that I had not come here to argue. I had brought professional consequences. Behind my father, I saw DeAndre stand up. He did not step into the aisle. He stayed close to the pew, his eyes darting toward the side exits of the sanctuary. The rat was finally sensing that the ship was underwater. "Please take your seats," I said to my parents, gesturing toward the VIP section. "Pastor Jenkins is about to start the testimony and charity portion of the service. I believe you have a very large check to present. I would hate to interrupt your moment of philanthropy." My mother looked like she was going to faint. Jasmine's hands were shaking so hard her bracelets rattled. They slowly backed into their pew, completely paralyzed by my lack of reaction to their intimidation. They had fired their best shots, the fake hug, the whispered threats, the community pressure, and the bullets had simply bounced off my armor. I turned and walked to the front row of the general seating section, sitting down directly across the aisle from their VIP ropes. Harrison sat to my right, placing his black briefcase on his lap. The two security guards stood at the end of the row, their arms crossed, effectively guarding our flank. The music swelled to a close. The congregation settled into their seats, the whispers dying down as Pastor Jenkins, a charismatic man with a booming voice, stepped up to the acrylic podium. "Welcome, brothers and sisters," Pastor Jenkins announced, his voice echoing through the massive room. "Today is a glorious day. Today we celebrate the generosity of our community. Today we honor those who have given so much to build the future of Greater Zion Fellowship." I leaned back in the wooden pew, crossing my legs, my eyes locked directly onto my father's pale, sweating face. He was holding the $10,000 novelty check with trembling hands. It was a check backed by an empty bank account representing a wealth that never belonged to him. The ambush was over. It was time to drop the bomb. Pastor Jenkins gripped the edges of the acrylic podium, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Now is the time in our service where we invite our congregants to step forward. We want to hear your testimonies of how the Lord has blessed you this year, and we want to recognize those who have pledged to our community building fund." Brother Thomas, "I believe your family has a special presentation for us today." My father puffed out his chest, his face immediately flushing with a mixture of pride and sheer terror. He gripped the edge of the giant $10,000 foam board check. My mother stood up beside him, fixing a wide, strained smile on her face. Jasmine remained seated, her eyes darting frantically between me and the stage. Before my father could take a single step out of the VIP pew, I stood up. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my tailored gray suit jacket and stepped calmly into the center aisle. Harrison followed a half step behind me, the black leather briefcase secured firmly in his grip. My two security contractors remained at the end of the row, their eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to interfere. "Pastor Jenkins," I called out, my voice clear and steady. It's clear, and it carried perfectly through the cavernous sanctuary, instantly silencing the low murmur of the crowd. Pastor Jenkins looked down from the stage, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He knew who I was, but he also knew I was the quiet daughter, the invisible one who sat in the back, the one my family had just publicly accused of losing her mind and committing cybercrimes. "Sister Chloe," he said slowly, his microphone picking up his hesitation. "We were just calling your father up for the presentation." "I know," I replied, walking steadily toward the steps of the stage. "But since my family has been so incredibly public about our personal financial affairs this weekend, I felt it was only right that I join them in their testimony. After all, a family's wealth is a shared blessing, is it not?" I did not ask for permission to come up. I simply climbed the carpeted stairs. Harrison flanked me, stopping just behind my right shoulder. I walked directly to the acrylic podium. Pastor Jenkins, perhaps intimidated by the physical presence of a high-powered corporate litigator, or perhaps just paralyzed by the sheer awkwardness of the moment, took a step back. I reached out and adjusted the microphone to my height. I looked down at the VIP section. My father was frozen, half standing, the giant fake check drooping in his trembling hands. My mother looked as though she was going to be physically sick, her face entirely drained of color. Jasmine was staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "Good morning, Greater Zion," I said, my voice projecting smoothly through the massive speakers. "Many of you watched a video yesterday afternoon. You saw my parents and my sister sitting in their beautiful living room, tearfully explaining that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown. They told you I was jealous. They told you I was trying to ruin my sister's business out of spite. They asked for your prayers to help heal my sick mind." I paused, letting the silence stretch across the massive room. I could see heads nodding slowly in the pews. I could see the judgmental glares from the church elders sitting in the front rows. "I want to thank you all for those prayers." I continued, my tone completely devoid of sarcasm. I sounded perfectly sincere, which only made what was coming next more devastating. Because those prayers worked. My mind has never been clearer. In fact, seeing that video helped me realize something incredibly important. It helped me realize just how wildly successful, wealthy, and independent my family has become. I turned to my right. Harrison clicked open the briefcase and handed me the first stack of heavily notarized papers. The crisp sound of the legal parchment rustling echoed through the microphone. "You see, I addressed the crowd again. For the last 5 years, I have been operating under the assumption that my family needed my financial help. I was under the misguided impression that they were struggling. But after seeing them brag about their vast wealth to venture capitalists this weekend, and after seeing them prepare to donate $10,000 to this church today, I realized I was insulting them by continuing to carry their burdens. I realized I was holding them back." A collective gasp rippled through the front rows. The ladies in the choir exchanged shocked, wide-eyed glances. "Chloe, stop this right now," my father hissed from the floor, his voice cracking with absolute panic. He dropped the foam check. It hit the carpeted floor with a dull, hollow thud. I ignored him completely. I turned to Pastor Jenkins and handed him the thick stack of papers. "Pastor, you are a man of the truth. I would like you to verify what you are looking at for the congregation." Pastor Jenkins hesitantly took the documents. He pulled his reading glasses out of his pocket and slid them onto his face. His eyes darted across the bold legal print. "That is the deed to the mansion my parents currently reside in," I explained, looking out over the sea of faces. 5 years ago, my father made some terrible investments. He was days away from total Chapter 11 bankruptcy. To save them the embarrassment of losing their social status in this very church, I purchased their current home in cash through my private commercial trust. I have been paying the property taxes, the utilities, and the maintenance fees ever since. My parents do not own that house. They are my tenants, and they pay 0 rent. The sanctuary erupted. It was not a murmur this time. It was an uproar. People were literally gasping, covering their mouths, whispering furiously to their neighbors, and pointing directly at my father. The great wealthy patriarch of Greater Zion Fellowship was suddenly exposed as a charity case living in his daughter's basement. Since my father is now wealthy enough to donate $10,000 to the building fund, I realized he no longer needs my charity, I said, raising my voice to cut through the escalating noise. So on Thursday night, I stopped paying. And because they missed the payment, that document the pastor is holding includes the official notice of default. The mansion is currently in active foreclosure. They will be evicted within the month. My mother let out a loud theatrical wail, burying her face in her hands. But nobody rushed to comfort her. There were no sympathetic pats on the back. The congregation was too busy staring in absolute shock at the shattered illusion. Lies. Jasmine screamed, suddenly jumping up from her seat. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face contorted in a desperate, ugly panic. "She is lying to you all. She hacked us. She is trying to steal my spa. Do not listen to her." I looked down at my sister, the golden child, the fake CEO who had locked me in a sandstorm. I held out my hand. Harrison placed the second manila folder directly into my palm. I pulled out the LLC Master Operating Agreement and held it up high for the entire room to see. "My sister Jasmine claims to be a self-made boss," I said, my voice dripping with cold, clinical precision. "She claims she built Zenith Aesthetics from the ground up. She told a major venture capitalist at Thanksgiving dinner that she bootstraps her own empire. Pastor, please look at the second page of that document. I handed the folder to the pastor. His eyes scanned the text, his mouth falling slightly open in disbelief. Who is listed as the sole managing member and 100% equity owner of Zenith Aesthetics? I asked him directly into the microphone. Pastor Jenkins cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable as he realized he was reading the absolute destruction of a prominent family. It says here, the sole legal owner is Chloe. That is correct, I said, turning back to the crowd. I bought the equipment. I pay the payroll out of my own pocket. I am the landlord who holds the commercial lease on the building. Jasmine is merely an at-will employee with zero equity. But since she is doing so incredibly well, and since she no longer wants me in her family, I decided to officially cut the corporate ties. I canceled her commercial lease payments on Thursday. Yesterday morning, a 3-day pay or quit eviction notice was taped to the front glass doors of her spa. If she does not have the back rent by tomorrow, the sheriff will be changing the locks. Jasmine's legs completely gave out. She literally collapsed back into the wooden pew, her expensive emerald gown bunching up around her. The reality of the eviction notice, something she had clearly tried to ignore or deny over the weekend, was now public record in front of the very people she had bragged to for years. The facade was completely gone. The perfect, wealthy, blessed family was stripped naked in front of 4,000 people. There was no hacking. There was no mental breakdown. There was only a tired, emotionally abused daughter who had finally decided to close her bank account and walk away. I looked at the congregation. The judgmental glares were gone, replaced by expressions of stunned awe and deep embarrassment. They had participated in the smear campaign. They had sent me horrible, vicious messages based on a fabricated narrative. Now they were staring at the undeniable, legally certified truth. I leaned into the microphone one last time. I told you I was not going to ruin your aesthetic. I told you I was going to let you stand on your own 2 feet. You wanted the church to know our business. Well, now they know. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that follows a massive bomb detonation. I had dismantled my parents. I had dismantled my sister. They were ruined socially and financially, but I was not finished. I turned my gaze from the front row and looked directly at the man sitting near the edge of the pew. DeAndre. He was sweating profusely, his hands gripping the wood of the bench, his eyes wide with a very specific, very dangerous kind of fear. He thought he was safe because I had only addressed the house and the spa. He thought his secrets were still hidden in the dark. He had absolutely no idea what was inside the third folder Harrison was holding. I held my hand out one final time. Harrison unclasped the final compartment of his briefcase and placed the thickest manila folder into my palm. It was heavy, packed with bank statements, wire transfer logs, and copies of forged signatures. I looked down at DeAndre. He was no longer sitting. He was hovering over the wooden back of the pew, looking like a trapped animal trying to calculate the distance to the nearest exit. DeAndre, I said softly into the microphone. His name echoed through the massive sanctuary, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. He flinched as if he had been physically struck. You have spent the last 5 years telling this congregation about your brilliant investments. You have stood on this very stage year after year and testified about the blessings of your corporate success. You convinced a prominent venture capitalist just 2 nights ago that you were a self-made millionaire sitting at a dinner table in a house you do not own, eating food you did not buy. I let the silence hang for a heavy, suffocating second. But real millionaires do not need to steal from their wives to pay their bills. The congregation gasped again, but this time it was sharper, laced with genuine, visceral outrage. In this community, flaunting wealth was respected, but stealing from family was a cardinal sin. DeAndre's face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate panic. "Chloe, shut your mouth!" he barked, his voice cracking wildly as it echoed through the silent room. He looked around at the judgmental faces suddenly closing in on him. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is making this up. She is a bitter, lonely woman trying to destroy my marriage because she is jealous. Do not listen to her. Pastor, you have to stop this." I ignored his frantic pleas. I opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of spreadsheets, holding them up to the bright stage lights. This is a certified forensic accounting report, finalized just this morning by one of the top financial investigation firms in Atlanta. I announced, my voice steady and unwavering. Since I am the sole managing member of the LLC that operates Zenith Aesthetics, I recently initiated a full comprehensive audit of our corporate accounts. For the past 14 months, DeAndre has been systematically embezzling money from the spa payroll. I turned slightly to Pastor Jenkins, who was still gripping the pulpit, his eyes wide with horror. I handed him a summary page. "Pastor, you can read the transactions yourself." DeAndre created dummy vendor accounts. He generated fake invoices for expensive laser equipment and aesthetic supplies that were never ordered and never delivered. He then wired the spa revenue directly into a private offshore account he controls. In total, he stole over $120,000 of operating funds. Funds that I had personally injected into the business to keep his wife's employees from bouncing their rent checks. A low, angry murmur swept through the pews. Jasmine let out a choked, strangled noise. She grabbed her own hair. Her perfectly styled curls instantly ruined her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated disbelief. She snapped her head toward DeAndre, waiting for him to aggressively deny it, waiting for him to tell her it was a misunderstanding or a simple accounting error. But DeAndre could not look at her. He was staring blindly at the carpet, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. Sweat pouring down his temples and soaking the collar of his expensive burgundy shirt. But the theft is not even the most tragic part of this story. I continued, my voice cutting through the thick tension in the room like a surgical scalpel. The real tragedy is what he chose to do with the money he stole from his own family. I reached back into the folder and pulled out a glossy 8x10 photograph along with a stack of leasing documents. "Jasmine, you spent Thanksgiving dinner bragging about your perfect marriage. You laughed in my face when you locked me out in a freezing sandstorm, thinking you had won the ultimate prize in life. But while you were playing the role of the wealthy, untouchable CEO, your husband was using my money to fund a completely separate life." I held the photograph high in the air. Though only the front rows could truly make out the image, the implication was already settling heavily over the room. It was a picture of a brand new Mercedes-Benz parked in the circular driveway of a luxury high-rise building in Midtown Atlanta. "DeAndre took the money he stole from your business and used it to sign a lease on a penthouse apartment across town," I declared, my words dropping like anvils onto the VIP section. "He also purchased this luxury vehicle in cash. Both the apartment and the car are legally registered in the name of a 24-year-old cocktail waitress named Kiara." A collective deafening shriek went up from the choir behind me. Several women in the front row physically covered their mouths, shaking their heads in absolute visceral disgust. The murmurs turned into loud, furious exclamations. The scandal was complete and absolute. Jasmine's face went completely slack. The arrogant, untouchable smirk she had worn for her entire life simply melted away, leaving behind a hollow, devastated shell. The realization hit her with the sheer force of a physical blow. The money was gone. The business she loved to brag about was a total sham. And the husband she had used as a trophy to taunt me for years had been actively humiliating her in the most degrading way possible. Her legs gave out completely. She could not hold her own weight. Jasmine dropped heavily to her knees, right there in the VIP pew, the expensive shimmering fabric of her emerald gown pooling around her on the floor like a collapsed parachute. She buried her face in her hands and began to wail. It was not the fake performative crying she had done on the Facebook video the day before. It was a deep, guttural, agonizing sound of total and absolute devastation. My parents were completely paralyzed. My mother, who had spent her entire life judging the women in the church for their family scandals, was now the epicenter of the greatest scandal Greater Zion Fellowship had ever witnessed. She slumped sideways into the pew, completely unresponsive, her wide-brimmed royal blue hat sitting askew on her head. She stared blankly at DeAndre as if he had just transformed into a monster right in front of her. My father was gripping the back of the wooden pew, his knuckles stark white, his mouth opening and closing repeatedly without any sound coming out. He looked down at his sobbing daughter, Then down at the fake $10,000 check, lying abandoned on the floor, realizing that his fake empire had just cost him the only person who had actually kept him afloat. Their perfect, curated family aesthetic was annihilated. The social status they had literally sold their souls to protect was reduced to ashes in less than 5 minutes. The public humiliation, the sudden realization that his entire life was over, was finally too much for DeAndre to bear. The mask of the smooth, sophisticated businessman completely shattered, revealing the desperate, violent fraud underneath. He could not argue with the documents. He could not lie his way out of the mistress. The only option his panicked brain could process was violence. He let out a furious roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage that ripped through the sanctuary. He shoved past my father, hitting the older man so hard my father stumbled back into the wooden bench. DeAndre lunged out of the pew and sprinted directly toward the stage. "I am going to kill you!" DeAndre screamed. His face twisted in absolute fury, spit flying from his lips. He charged up the carpeted steps, his fists clenched, his eyes locked entirely on me. He wanted to destroy the person who had stripped him of his power. The congregation screamed in terror. People scrambled out of the nearby pews trying to get out of the way. Pastor Jenkins shouted something unintelligible and stumbled backward, knocking over a brass microphone stand that crashed loudly onto the stage floor. But I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not take a single step backward. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the cool edges of the acrylic podium. My expression completely unchanged because I knew exactly what was about to happen. Before DeAndre's foot could even hit the top step of the stage, my two massive security contractors moved with terrifying practice speed. They did not hesitate and they did not hold back. The guard on my right stepped forward, dropping his shoulder, and drove his entire body weight directly into DeAndre's chest. The impact sounded like two cars colliding. DeAndre's forward momentum was instantly halted. He was lifted entirely off his feet and slammed violently backward onto the carpeted stairs. Before DeAndre could even process the impact, the second guard descended on him. He grabbed DeAndre's right arm, twisting it sharply behind his back in a brutal joint lock. In less than 3 seconds, the physical threat was completely and utterly neutralized. DeAndre was pinned face down against the hard steps, groaning in sudden agony, his cheek smashed roughly into the red carpet. The first guard pressed a heavy, unforgiving knee firmly between DeAndre's shoulder blades, holding him entirely immobile against the floor. "Stay down," the guard commanded. His voice was cold, flat, and professional, echoing cleanly through the chaotic, screaming sanctuary. DeAndre thrashed for a split second, his legs kicking out as he tried to break free from the hold, but the second guard applied a fraction more pressure to his twisted arm. A sharp, loud yelp of pain ripped from DeAndre's lips. He finally stopped moving, panting heavily, his expensive burgundy blazer wrinkled and twisted around his shoulders. He lay there, utterly defeated. Pinned to the floor of the church in front of 4,000 horrified spectators, I looked down at him from the podium. The man who had threatened me, who had stolen from me, and who had tried to intimidate me with a fake lawsuit, was now eating the carpet right at my feet. The congregation was in an absolute uproar, a cacophony of shouts, crying, and disbelief. I slowly gathered my legal documents, tapping them neatly against the podium. Completely unharmed and totally victorious, Harrison stepped up to the microphone, his calm, authoritative presence instantly silencing the nearest rows. He announced that if the family wanted to avoid having the police called for assault and battery, they would leave the premises immediately. The guards hauled DeAndre to his feet, keeping his arms firmly locked behind his back. He groaned, the fight completely drained out of him, replaced by the terrifying realization of his exposed crimes. My father grabbed my mother by the arm, hoisting her up while she wept uncontrollably. Jasmine stumbled along behind them, looking like a ghost in her ruined emerald gown, her expensive heels dragging against the floor. We formed a strange, tense procession, walking back down the center aisle. The congregation parted for us, pulling their knees in and averting their eyes as if my family had suddenly become contagious. The silence was heavier now. There were no murmurs, no whispers, just the sound of our footsteps against the carpet. I walked a few paces behind my family, Harrison at my side, feeling the cool, Refreshing air of the foyer hit my face as the heavy wooden doors swung open. We stepped out into the brilliant, cloudless Sunday morning. The contrast between the bright, warm sunlight and the absolute darkness of my family's ruin was poetic. The air smelled of pine and fresh pavement, a stark departure from the suffocating perfume and cologne that usually masked their presence. But the spectacle was far from over. I had choreographed this entire morning down to the minute, and the final act was already waiting on the asphalt. The VIP section of the church parking lot was situated directly at the bottom of the grand stone steps reserved exclusively for the pastor, the elders, and the highest donors. When my parents and sister reached the pavement, they stopped dead in their tracks. Jasmine let out a sharp, breathless gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. DeAndre, still firmly held by my security detail, strained his neck to look, his eyes bulging from their sockets. Two massive heavy-duty tow trucks were idling loudly in the VIP spaces, their amber hazard lights flashing rhythmically against the pristine brick exterior of the church. One driver was actively hooking heavy steel chains to the front axle of Jasmine's pristine white Range Rover. The second driver had already secured DeAndre's custom matte black Porsche Panamera and was operating the hydraulic lift, hoisting the rear tires of the expensive sports car into the air. "Hey!" DeAndre screamed, struggling uselessly against the grip of the guards. "Put that down! That is my car! You cannot do this! You have no right to touch my property!" The tow truck driver, a burly man in a neon orange safety vest, did not even look up from his control panel. He just pointed a grease-stained thumb toward me, chewing casually on a toothpick. "Actually, they can," I said, walking slowly down the stone steps until I was standing level with them on the asphalt. "You see, DeAndre, those vehicles were never yours. They were leased under the Zenith Aesthetics corporate account. You used my company's credit profile to secure the financing because your personal credit score was destroyed years ago. Since you are both currently facing eviction and massive legal liability, I instructed my financial team to officially terminate those commercial leases on Friday afternoon. I also provided the recovery agency with your exact Sunday schedule. I figured the church parking lot would be the most convenient place for the pickup, ensuring you would not try to hide the assets." Jasmine stared at the Range Rover as it was yanked backward onto the flatbed with a loud metallic clank. "That is my car!" she sobbed, her voice weak and broken, stripped of all its usual arrogance. "I need that car. How am I supposed to get home? How am I supposed to go anywhere?" "You are a highly successful independent CEO, Jasmine," I replied, my voice completely devoid of pity. "I am sure a woman of your vast bootstrapped resources can afford a premium rideshare, or perhaps DeAndre can carry you." But the repossession operation was merely the opening act of the parking lot finale. Standing a few yards away, leaning casually against the polished hood of a sleek black town car, was a man my family recognized instantly. He was dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, checking his platinum wristwatch with an air of mild, detached impatience. It was Arthur Sterling, the billionaire venture capitalist, the man my family had spent their entire Thanksgiving dinner trying to impress. The man they believed was going to hand them millions of dollars to expand their fake empire and save them from their impending financial doom. As we approached the bottom of the steps, Mr. Sterling pushed himself off his car and walked directly toward us. My father instinctively tried to straighten his posture, desperately attempting to salvage whatever shred of dignity he had left. He reached up futilely, trying to smooth his disheveled gray hair, slapping on a fake, terrified smile that made him look completely unhinged. "Arthur," my father stammered, stepping forward with his hand outstretched. "What a surprise to see you here. Please excuse the commotion. We are just dealing with a minor family dispute, a slight misunderstanding with some leased vehicles. It is nothing we cannot handle." Mr. Sterling did not take my father's hand. He did not look at my mother, who was hyperventilating against a concrete planter. He did not look at Jasmine, who was currently weeping openly on the pavement, and he barely spared a glance for DeAndre, who was still pinned by the security guards. Instead, Mr. Sterling walked directly past all of them and stopped squarely in front of me. He extended his hand, his eyes bright with genuine professional respect. "Chloe," he said, his voice warm and highly engaging, "it is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you in person. I shook his hand firmly, projecting the exact executive presence I used in boardrooms across the country. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Sterling. I appreciate you taking the time out of your Sunday morning to be here. I know your schedule is incredibly demanding. My parents stared at the two of us, their mouths hanging open in total unadulterated shock. The venture capitalist, the man they had worshipped as a literal god of wealth, was speaking to their invisible daughter as an equal. The hierarchy they had enforced for my entire life was being dismantled right in front of their eyes. Harrison stepped forward, offering Mr. Sterling a professional nod. "Everything is in order, Arthur. I assume you reviewed the files I sent over on Friday afternoon." "I did, Harrison." Mr. Sterling replied, his expression turning deadly serious as he adjusted his suit jacket. He looked back at me. "I want to personally thank you, Chloe. Your attorney reached out to my office on Friday. He provided me with the full forensic accounting report regarding Zenith Aesthetics, as well as the certified legal documentation regarding your total ownership of the LLC and the residential properties." Mr. Sterling finally turned to look at my father. The polite warmth in his eyes completely vanished, replaced by the ruthless, predatory glare of a man who destroyed failing companies for a living. The air temperature between them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Thomas," Mr. Sterling said, his voice dripping with absolute freezing contempt, "you sat at my Thanksgiving table and fed me a fairy tale. You presented your daughter Jasmine as a brilliant entrepreneur, and your son-in-law as a financial prodigy. You were actively preparing to pitch me a $2 million investment strategy based entirely on assets that belong to your other daughter. You were attempting to leverage her wealth to steal my capital." "That is not true," my father pleaded, stepping forward, his hands raised in a desperate begging gesture. "Arthur, please, you have to understand the context. Chloe is unwell. She is trying to sabotage us out of spite. We can still make the deal work. We have other assets. We have the house. We can use the house as collateral." "You do not own the house, Thomas," Mr. Sterling snapped, shutting my father down instantly. The sharp crack of his voice made my mother flinch. "Chloe's legal team provided me with the deed and the notice of default. You own absolutely nothing. You are a fraud. Your entire family is a carefully constructed lie, designed to extract money from legitimate investors." Jasmine let out another wail, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. DeAndre had stopped struggling entirely. He just hung his head, staring at the asphalt, realizing that the ultimate prize, the venture capital money he had been banking on to cover his embezzled tracks and fund his mistress, was completely gone. The walls had entirely closed in. "I do not take kindly to people wasting my time," Mr. Sterling continued, stepping closer to DeAndre. "But I take it even less kindly when people attempt to solicit investments from my firm under fraudulent pretenses. In my industry, we do not just walk away from con artists. We make a very loud, very public example of them." Mr. Sterling reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed white envelope. He held it out. When DeAndre refused to take it, his arm still firmly held by the guards, Mr. Sterling simply shoved the heavy envelope into the front breast pocket of DeAndre's wrinkled burgundy blazer. "Consider yourself served," Mr. Sterling said coldly, stepping back. "My legal team filed the paperwork first thing Friday evening. I am officially suing you, your wife, and your father-in-law for fraud, misrepresentation, and attempting to solicit investments under false pretenses. I will be seeking massive compensatory damages for the time and resources my firm wasted reviewing your fake portfolio. I am going to freeze every single bank account associated with your names by Monday morning. By the time my lawyers are finished tearing you apart, you will not even be able to afford a cup of coffee." My mother gasped, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically shot. She leaned against my father, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed. "Harold," she cried, her voice high, thin, and panicked. "Harold, what are we going to do? We do not have any money to fight a billionaire. We do not have anything." My father just stared at the white envelope sticking out of DeAndre's pocket, his eyes wide and terribly vacant. The reality of his situation had finally crushed the last remaining ounce of his ego. He was not just broke. He was about to be hunted by a financial predator with unlimited resources. Mr. Sterling turned back to me, the professional warmth instantly returning to his face. "Chloe," he said smoothly, ignoring the crying family behind him. "It is rare to meet someone with your level of clinical precision. You protected your assets flawlessly and handled a highly volatile situation with absolute grace. When the dust settles from this mess, my firm is always looking for silent partners with sharp, ruthless instincts. I would love to take you to lunch and discuss some legitimate investment opportunities." "I would be open to that conversation, Arthur," I replied, offering a polite, measured smile. "My assistant will contact your office next week to set up a time." "Excellent," Mr. Sterling said. He nodded respectfully to Harrison, then turned and walked back to his waiting town car. The driver opened the rear door and Mr. Sterling slid inside without looking back. The black car glided silently out of the parking lot, disappearing down the tree-lined street, taking my family's last shred of hope with it. The heavy rumble of diesel engines pulled my attention back to the tow trucks. The drivers had finished securing the vehicles. With a loud hiss of hydraulic brakes, the flatbeds began to roll forward, carrying away the Porsche and the Range Rover. Jasmine watched her car disappear down the road, her shoulders shaking with silent, exhausted sobs. I turned to the security guards. "You can let him go now." The guards immediately stepped back, releasing DeAndre's arms in unison. DeAndre stumbled forward, rubbing his wrists, his head hanging low. He did not try to charge at me again. He did not yell. He did not say a single word. He just stood there on the pavement, looking like a broken hollow shell of a man, waiting for the inevitable arrival of federal investigators. I looked at my family standing together in the empty VIP parking section. They had arrived this morning in luxury vehicles wearing designer clothes, preparing to present a massive novelty check to a congregation that adored them. They had spent the entire weekend trying to manipulate the public into believing I was insane, trying to shame me into submission. Now they were stranded in a church parking lot on a beautiful Sunday morning. They had no cars. Their businesses were seized. Their home was in active foreclosure. They were facing a massive fraud lawsuit from a billionaire and federal prison time for embezzlement. The illusion was completely dead, and I was the one who had finally pulled the plug. Harrison stepped up beside me, checking his watch with a quiet click. "Our car is waiting around the back, Chloe. Whenever you are ready." "I am ready," I said. I did not say goodbye to my parents. I did not offer a final gloating speech to Jasmine or DeAndre. They were no longer worth my breath or my energy. They had wanted to play a high-stakes game of social manipulation, and they had simply lost to a vastly superior opponent. I turned my back on them and walked away, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. The Sunday morning air felt incredibly clean and crisp. For the first time in my entire life, the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations was completely gone. I stepped into the back of my waiting SUV, Harrison closing the door securely behind me. As the driver pulled out of the church parking lot, I did not even glance out the tinted window. My family was officially in the past. 2 weeks passed since that Sunday morning. The dust did not just settle, it completely buried them. I stood on the sidewalk of West Peachtree Street, wrapping my wool coat tighter around my shoulders against the crisp December wind. The morning air was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating toxicity I had carried for over 30 years. Directly in front of me, a licensed commercial locksmith was drilling through the heavy brass deadbolt of the double-glass doors. Above the doors, the elegant glowing sign for Zenith Aesthetics was completely dark. The power had been cut 3 days ago, right after the eviction notice officially expired. The fallout from the church ambush had been biblical in its proportions. Arthur Sterling did exactly what he promised. His high-powered legal team filed emergency injunctions by Monday morning, freezing every single bank account tied to my parents, Jasmine and DeAndre. The federal authorities did not take long to act on the forged deed I had provided. DeAndre was arrested at a cheap motel near the airport, trying to flee the state with a duffel bag full of clothes. He was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, denied bail, facing decades in prison for wire fraud and grand larceny. Jasmine had completely vanished from social media. Her phone was disconnected. Aunt Maxine told me she was sleeping on a friend's couch in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, desperately trying to find a job as a receptionist at a strip mall salon. The locksmith pulled the old cylinder out with a loud metal scraping sound and inserted the new hardware. I watched him work with a deep, quiet satisfaction. The spa was empty. The expensive leather waiting chairs, the imported Italian styling stations, the crystal display cases, all of it legally seized by my holding company to cover the massive amount of back rent and the stolen payroll. It was no longer Jasmine's fake empire. It was just another commercial asset in my portfolio ready to be cleaned out and leased to a legitimate business owner. The locksmith tightened the final screw, tested the new silver key, and handed it to me. "It is all yours, ma'am," he said, packing up his heavy canvas tool bag. I thanked him, transferring his payment directly to his account from my phone. He walked to his work van and drove away, leaving me alone on the quiet morning sidewalk. I turned to walk back to my car when a beat-up, bright yellow taxicab aggressively pulled up to the curb, its tires scraping loudly against the concrete. The sight was incredibly jarring. My family never took public cabs. They only used black car services or their leased luxury vehicles. They considered standard taxis to be beneath their social standing. The rear door popped open. My father stepped out first. I almost did not recognize him. The proud, impeccably groomed patriarch who had tried to intimidate me in the church aisle was completely gone. His posture was severely hunched. He was wearing an old, oversized gray sweater that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a donation bin. He had not shaved in days, and his face was drawn pale and deeply etched with the undeniable physical toll of total financial ruin. He reached into the back seat and pulled out my mother. Brenda looked even worse. She was not wearing her wide-brimmed hats, her pearls, or her royal blue dresses. She was wearing cheap black sweatpants and a wrinkled white blouse. Her hair, usually sprayed and styled into a flawless, stiff helmet, was tied back in a messy, frizzy knot at the base of her neck. The cab driver popped the trunk. My father walked to the back and began pulling out luggage. 4 massive, heavy Louis Vuitton suitcases hit the pavement. It was a perfectly absurd visual. They were standing on the street corner looking like vagrants, but they were dragging thousands of dollars worth of empty designer leather. They paid the driver with a handful of crumpled cash, and the cab sped away, leaving the smell of exhaust in the cold air. My father turned and saw me standing by the glass doors of the dark spa. For a second, we just stared at each other across the concrete. Then the absolute desperation kicked in. "Chloe!" my mother cried out, her voice cracking immediately. She abandoned her heavy suitcase and practically sprinted down the sidewalk toward me. "Chloe, thank God you are here. We tried to call your lawyer, but his office will not take our calls. We did not know where else to find you. We thought you might come here to check on the property." She reached out, trying to grab my hands, trying to initiate the physical contact of a loving mother. But I took a smooth, deliberate step backward, keeping a rigid, unforgiving distance between us. She let her hands fall to her sides, her chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. My father dragged the heavy suitcases down the pavement, the wheels clicking loudly against the concrete seams. He stopped a few feet away, leaning heavily on the handle of the largest bag. He looked at me with eyes that were completely hollowed out, devoid of any of his former arrogance. "They took the house." "Chloe," my father said, his voice trembling, completely stripped of all its former booming authority. "The bank executives came yesterday morning. They brought the county sheriff with them. They gave us exactly 2 hours to pack whatever we could fit into these bags and forced us out into the driveway. The locks are changed. The gates are padlocked. We cannot get back inside." "I know, Dad," I replied, my voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of emotion. "I authorized the final foreclosure execution. You missed your grace period." My mother let out a loud, pathetic sob. "Chloe, please, you have to help us." Arthur Sterling froze our primary checking accounts. We cannot access our savings. We cannot even buy groceries. We slept in a budget motel last night. And we spent our last $80 on that cab to get here. We have absolutely nothing left in the world." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, pleading. desperately, searching for the obedient, anxious daughter she had manipulated for 32 years. She was searching for the girl who used to write checks just to buy a fraction of her approval. "You have that big condo downtown," my father interjected, trying to inject a tiny ounce of his old demanding tone into the conversation, though it sounded incredibly weak and pathetic. "The one with the guest bedrooms. We just need to stay with you for a few weeks. Just until we can figure this out. Just until we can talk to the lawyers and get the accounts unfrozen and clear up this massive misunderstanding. We can put the suitcases in your trunk right now." They were not apologizing. They were not taking accountability for the lies, the financial abuse, or the public humiliation they had tried to inflict on me. They were simply looking for a new host to attach themselves to. They had drained the mansion, they had drained the spa, and now they wanted to move into my private sanctuary and drain my peace. I looked at the massive Louis Vuitton suitcases. I looked at the dark, empty spa behind me. And I looked at the two people who had stood by and let my sister lock me out in a freezing sandstorm because my coat was not designer enough for their fake aesthetic. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and dangerously calm. "Dad, I want you to listen to me very carefully, because this is the absolute last time I am ever going to speak to you." They both froze, their eyes fixed on my face, waiting for the lifeline they felt completely entitled to. "I do not have a guest bedroom for you," I stated clearly, enunciating every single word. "I do not have a couch for you. I do not have $1 for you. You are not moving into my home today, tomorrow, or ever." "Chloe, you cannot do this!" My mother shrieked, the panic escalating into pure, unfiltered hysteria. "We are your parents. You cannot leave us on the street like dogs. We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I shot back, my voice finally hardening into pure steel. "I paid my debt to this family 10 times over. I bought your house. I funded your lifestyle. I kept you from bankruptcy 5 years ago. And how did you repay me? You used my money to pretend you were better than me. You let Jasmine humiliate me. You went on Facebook and told 4,000 people I was a mentally unstable criminal." "That was a mistake," my father stammered, tears actually welling up in his eyes, spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. "We were just scared. We were trying to protect the family image." "The family image," I repeated, shaking my head in utter disgust. "The family image was always more important to you than your actual daughter. You wanted to play the role of the wealthy, untouchable elites. Well, congratulations. You are finally experiencing the real consequences of the real world. You are broke." My father took a desperate step forward, his hands shaking violently. "Chloe, please, I am begging you. It is the holiday season. We have nowhere to go. We are family." I looked him dead in the eye. I remembered the freezing wind. I remembered the heavy oak door slamming in my face. I remembered the exact words my sister had whispered, and the accidental text message my father had sent confirming my absolute exclusion from their circle. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my car keys. "No, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, icy whisper that cut through the cold morning air like a surgical blade. "Do you not get the hint?" My parents stared at me, completely paralyzed, as their own profound cruelty was reflected right back at them. "This year is for family only," I said, repeating the exact phrase that had triggered the collapse of their entire world. "And you made it perfectly clear that I am not family." My mother let out a gut-wrenching scream, dropping to her knees on the dirty sidewalk, burying her face in her hands, as the reality of her situation finally crushed her. My father just stood there, his jaw trembling, his eyes wide with the horrifying realization that the bridge was not just burned, it was entirely vaporized. There was no manipulation left to use. There was no guilt trip that would work. I was completely permanently immune to them. I turned my back on them and walked toward my car, parked at the end of the block. I did not walk fast. I did not run. I walked with the slow, measured pace of a woman who had absolutely nothing to run from anymore. "Chloe," my father yelled one last time, his voice echoing off the brick buildings. I did not turn around. I unlocked my car, opened the door, and slid into the quiet leather interior. The engine purred to life with a smooth, powerful hum. I pulled the gear shift into drive and slowly pulled away from the curb. I looked in my rearview mirror one last time. Thomas and Brenda were shrinking in the distance. They were just two small broken figures standing on a cold sidewalk, surrounded by heavy, useless luxury luggage sobbing outside the dark locked doors of an empire that never actually belonged to them. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal. The car accelerated smoothly, merging into the morning traffic. I turned on the radio, feeling the warm air from the heater wash over my face. I drove away, leaving them on the curb, leaving them to the absolute ruins of their own making, and I drove forward into a life that was finally completely and unapologetically mine. 6 months have passed since that cold December morning on the sidewalk. Time has a funny way of clarifying the truth once the noise of toxic people is finally removed from your life. My business empire has continued to expand, unburdened by the constant, exhausting financial bleed of sustaining my family's illusions. I partnered with Arthur Sterling on a massive commercial development project in downtown Atlanta, and we are breaking ground next week. My life is quiet, my portfolio is thriving, and most importantly, my mind is completely at peace. The same cannot be said for the people I left behind on that curb. The justice system moved with a terrifying mechanical efficiency when it came to DeAndre. The federal prosecutors did not offer him a lenient plea deal. The evidence was too overwhelming, the forged deed too perfectly documented, and the wire fraud too cleanly traced. DeAndre is currently sitting in a federal penitentiary outside of Atlanta serving a mandatory 7-year sentence. The venture capital lawsuit completely bankrupted him before the criminal trial even started. And Kiara, the 24-year-old cocktail waitress he sacrificed everything to impress, abandoned the midtown apartment the second the luxury cars were repossessed. She did not even show up to his sentencing hearing. He sits in a concrete cell, entirely stripped of his designer suits and his arrogant smirk, left with absolutely nothing but the harsh reality of his own greed. Jasmine's fall from grace was perhaps the most poetic. The self-proclaimed CEO and bootstrapped mogul was forced to actually enter the workforce she loved to brag about conquering. With her assets frozen, her credit destroyed, and her reputation in the Atlanta beauty industry completely radioactive, no high-end salon would even look at her resume. She is currently working as a junior stylist at a discount strip mall salon in a neighboring county, sweeping up hair clippings and dealing with walk-in clients. She has to wear a standard black polyester uniform, a far cry from the emerald gowns and designer labels she used to parade around in. She takes public transportation, now a daily reality check that has reportedly broken her spirit. There are no more glamorous social media posts, no more bachelorette trips to Tulum, and no more fake empowerment speeches. Aunt Maxine told me Jasmine complains constantly about the long hours and the low pay, completely oblivious to the irony that she is finally experiencing the very grind she used to pretend she had mastered. She is learning the hard way that true success is built on character, not stolen credit. As for my parents, the loss of the mansion was only the beginning of their punishment. For narcissists, the greatest tragedy is not the loss of money, but the loss of an audience. They are currently renting a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The Louis Vuitton luggage they dragged onto the sidewalk that day takes up half their closet space, completely useless now that they have nowhere to travel and nobody to impress. But their true prison is social. They have not shown their faces at Greater Zion Fellowship since the Sunday I exposed them. The shame of being unmasked in front of 4,000 people was too much for their fragile egos to bear. They lost their VIP seating, they lost the respect of Pastor Jenkins, and they lost the community they had dedicated their entire lives to impressing. Aunt Maxine mentioned that my mother still tries to dress up and go to the local grocery store, desperately hoping someone will recognize her as the prominent society woman she used to be. But the illusion is dead. My father had to take a job managing the front desk of a budget hotel just to make rent, forced to answer to a manager who does not care about his former country club status. They spend their days isolated in that small apartment, blaming everyone but themselves, clinging bitterly to the memory of a lifestyle that was never actually theirs. People often tell you that family is everything. Society conditions us to believe that sharing the same DNA means you owe someone your infinite patience, your unconditional loyalty, and your wallet. We are taught to forgive the unforgivable simply because the person hurting us happens to be a relative. But I am here to tell you that blood does not entitle anyone to your bank account. Blood does not entitle anyone to the fruits of your hard work, your late nights, and your sacrifices. And most importantly, blood absolutely does not entitle anyone to your peace. Setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you stop shielding toxic people from the consequences of their own actions, you force them to finally meet themselves. My family met themselves and they were utterly destroyed by what they saw. If a friend treated you the way your toxic family treats you, you would cut them off without a second thought. You would never tolerate a stranger stealing from you, gaslighting you, and locking you out in the cold. You should never lower your standards of respect just because the person disrespecting you shares your last name. I spent 32 years shrinking myself so my family could feel big. I funded their vanity while they mocked my simplicity. I played the role of the quiet, invisible workhorse because I was desperately hoping that one day my generosity would finally earn their love. But love cannot be bought, and respect cannot be negotiated with people who fundamentally view you as an appliance. The moment I closed my banking app in that freezing car, I did not just cut off their funding. I cut off the generational curse of financial and emotional abuse. I took my power back. I realized that my success was not a communal resource for ungrateful people to exploit. It was the armor I built to protect myself, and I had every right to wear it proudly. Walking away from my family was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was also the first time I ever truly stepped into my own life. I am no longer the scapegoat. I am the architect of my own destiny, and the foundation is absolutely unbreakable. Have you ever had to use the law to teach your toxic family that your generosity was a privilege, not a right? Drop your stories in the comments below. Make sure to hit subscribe because your peace is the best investment you will ever make.